Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Wednesday Leading Change this week with Jesse Houwing. Hi Jesse, welcome back.
Hello.
So Jesse, on Wednesdays we like to dive into what might be one of the most important hidden tasks of the Scrum Master, which is to work with change. I mean, sometimes it's, agile adoption, maybe it's a tool adoption, maybe it's a change in process, maybe it's something else like a personal change, or it's maybe, agile at scale, like you were talking about earlier in the week. Maybe that's a bigger change outside the team. Anyway, we work with change all the time, and therefore it's critical for us to be aware of and have a, pretty robust toolbox of change tools and methods and approaches. So tell us a story of a change process you were involved with, and then walk us through the tips, the tricks, the tools, the techniques you learned back then that you still apply today.
All right. So I ended up working a lot with Scale through a number of big projects I ran with clients in the healthcare industry, in the airline industry, kind of places where there is lots of work and there are lots of teams. And one of the interesting things that we encountered there was as well, so many specialisms that it sometimes becomes hard to kind of stay within the 6 to 9 people on a Scrum team. If you're building kind of a hardware solution for heart surgeons and you actually have a heart surgeon on your team, it's not that if you put that heart surgeon next to a software developer for 3 months, that after 3 months, that software developer has kind of magically grown heart surgery skills. So it's interesting kind of how much knowledge you can share and how much cross functionality you can kind of create by having people work closely together. Of course, you'll get better and you start to understand the domain better, but there are limits to what is possible. And within that organization, we were working with hundreds of people working on the same product. They were doing SAFe back then. Or they were introducing SAFe back then, I should say. When the introduction started, many teams were already doing Scrum. And when I came in, I was already very surprised about how good their Scrum implementation already was, how closely the teams worked together, how much communication was happening, how much they actually got done. Their continuous delivery and kind of technical excellence of the way that they built their product, they were already very, very advanced. I originally thought when I was kind of asked to come in and sort of the problems that were described before I started talking to people, I had a whole bunch of assumptions about what would be going on in that organization, but I was completely blown away kind of by the quality that was already embedded into the organization. One of the biggest things that you end up in that case is that the structure of the product that you've built is reflected in the organization around it. Especially if it's big. So if you've got a single team working on a single product, then you might see kind of a reflection of the kinds of people and the kinds of skills that you have on your team. But hopefully you'll be able to kind of, as your team grows, be able to evolve your software. But if you're doing that with over 300 people contributing to the same product, and in this case, it was kind of a reusable framework being used by multiple other products as well. So potentially even more than 300 people involved across different continents. I think there were 3 different continents involved. It was huge. And so the product structure kind of reflected the team structure. A lot of the knowledge silos within the organization kind of were the same. And even by taking the people and moving them to different teams and kind of making sure that you've got fully cross-functional teams, it doesn't magically change the underlying project or the underlying product, the code base, the way that things get delivered, the infrastructure that it runs on, the architecture that it was built around, to make it easy for those people to then be productive. So even though it feels like the cross-functional teams would be more productive in that case, it turns out that you'll just find a lot of kind of tradition, kind of old things that are holding you back in trying to make that change. And you either have to battle through it, and that takes time and it slows you down, and it might be very frustrating because you're not delivering as much kind of direct value yet because you're trying by fixing all of those things to then become more productive. And it's really interesting, kind of that battle that was happening, and knowledge transfer that were needed, and skills transfers that were needed, and training that was required, and improvements to the product. And of course, the product backlog, kind of, if you just let in this case, the more kind of business product owners fill the product backlog, is completely filled with kind of the more functional requests. And they had a couple of architects as well. They were kind of feeding some of the big technical changes, but a lot of the small technical changes just had to be done by the teams. It becomes really interesting once you've got so many different kind of things in motion. It becomes very, very hard to control the change, because some teams are evolving faster than other teams. Some code may be evolving faster than other code. Some things could be rewritten and therefore could be kind of set up in the right way, or at least the right way for that point in time. Because of course, if you then later change, maybe it's the wrong way anyway, you'll probably never know. But it's a really kind of interesting kind of process to kind of see all of those things in motion. And one of the things there that I encountered that struck me was how much we are driven by trying to deliver what's being asked of us.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you've got a product backlog and there's a bunch of things on there. And then during sprint planning, you're asked to select, and during program increment planning and safe, you're asked to select work from that product backlog. But there are all these things that you know that you would like to do. And somehow a lot of people are waiting for permission to actually do that work. It has to be written down somewhere. There must be a task for it. There must be a product backlog item for it, or somebody should have created a user story for it, or they need to create a user story for it themselves and then get prioritized through the process. For some reason, a lot of people are looking for that kind of validation of permission that they are allowed to make that change. I just found that in many cases, if you just make the change, everybody is happy. And even if you ask formal permission for the change, you very often get it. But for a lot of people, there's kind of a big hesitancy to ask for the thing that they would like to do kind of at that point in time.
So what you're saying is people become kind of, a friend of mine used to name that behavior like the slaves to the backlog. So the backlog is what tells us what to do and nothing else can be done. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And interestingly, officially, the backlog should tell you what it is that we would like to do, but not how to do it. So if as part of delivering that feature, you also want to refactor part of the underlying code, for me, that's a how thing. If as a team you decided that that's the right thing to do, you don't need to ask permission to do it. You can make that change because it's required. Nobody asks me whether or not I should, if for every line of code that I would make or change, I would have to request permission, that would be weird. But somehow there are certain kinds of changes that we would like to make where people feel that they need to ask permission to make that change. And they are the experts themselves in whether or not the change should be made. So it's indeed kind of, are you a slave to that list? Or it's a really interesting kind of process where everything that the team feels that they should do needs to be encoded kind of in product backlog items or acceptance criteria, or at least that some way needs to be documented before the change can happen.
So what did you do with these teams? Because I imagine that they encountered obstacles that could have been overcome, even blockers that could have been overcome by doing some of those things they were asking for permission. So what do you these days do with teams that are stuck in this waiting for permission mode?
Well, it starts just with explaining this because, and very often it's, oh, I didn't know. Or you should talk about our product owner about that. And then you talk with the product owner about it and they say, well, of course I want him to do the right thing. And so the whole team looks at the product owner like, but you never say that. It's unspoken. It's kind of, and it's probably from old behavior. Like we talked about with the metrics a couple of days ago. It's the unspoken. Somebody once, long time ago, was always asking these kinds of questions. So they still probably find it important, but it's just making the validation whether or not that is still true. It's not like I am the same person I am 3 years ago. So if I worked with you and you would treat me exactly like you did 3 years ago, without kind of assuming that I changed and improved and worked on myself in that time as well, that's kind of that almost feels bad, doesn't it? But it happens a lot. This kind of, but you used to find that important. Yeah, a long time ago. I prefer it if you just check that. So that is a really kind of interesting thing, kind of getting that permission in there. So we worked in that organization a lot with the teams to just start talking about these kind of things as if they were a good thing. And suddenly a lot of people kind of automatically started doing them. So that was nice. So they were doing SAFe at that point in time. So we asked them as part of their program increment planning to create team objectives that were purely on improvements that they would like to see. And then their management would look at kind of all the team objectives that were kind of put forward, and they would create this big list of, and these are all the objectives that people would like to follow. And this is the priority order that we'd like to assign to it. It was on the exercise that we did with the management. And management actually put a lot of these internal improvement kind of objectives very high on the list. And all of the teams, they were kind of completely baffled. They hadn't expected that those things would also be important to the management, but they were always unspoken. If you don't talk about them, then and the way that we talked about it, kind of, we're going to fix it as we're changing the other code. So it's not that it's going to be refactoring the product for 6 months in a row. No, we're going to be delivering value, and as we're delivering value, we're also going to make some changes that we feel are important, and that helps a lot. With new teams, I'm now kind of more cognizant of these kind of things happening. So I try to just open that conversation a lot earlier as I'm working with them. And in training classes, kind of these kinds of examples are usually quite easy to kind of bring to the table and to spike a discussion off of them.
Absolutely. Great story, Jesse. Thank you for sharing. Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.